Welcome back to this format. So the idea behind this and the next video is to go over designs that were done by other designers and to analyze them and learn from doing that. Right now we're going to take a look at a collection I created on Dribbble just for this course, and I tried to look for specific examples of typography used in a particular way so that we can see how it was used, what's different about it, what's really specific about it, and how you can keep that in mind when you're designing a specific type of project. When we're exploring others' work, Dribbble is usually the place where you're gonna see really like eye-catching shots that were done for the specific purpose of being visually pleasing, and more often than not it's not actually a really usable product. Now I've tried to look for examples of something that's actually looking like a real product and not just a couple of really nice illustrations and colors together in a mobile app UI that no one's ever gonna develop or use. Overall, if you're a beginner, just keep in mind that Dribbble is sometimes not really the ideal place to look for how things are done in real life. That's the reason why this video is split up into two pieces. Basically, this first one is going to be more about the visual stuff, and the second one is going to be more about analyzing real-life products, some that you might already be familiar with, but you're now going to look at them through a different lens. So let's start things off with this. In this example, we can take a look at using all caps for most of your titles in the UI. You can see there is other text on all of these example screens, but the main parts are always these all caps short titles that go into 2 to 4 lines, I think. Line height is very small, the text is very legible, and there seems to be some kind of character spacing in here. It's not big, but it's enough to be noticeable. The video is moving, so it's kind of hard to analyze other parts, but you can see how it's working with the other visual elements, and it especially works well with photos. You can see text actually overlaying the photo. That's something that you can really explore in some projects, especially if the darker part of the photo, or lighter if you're using dark text, is in that area where you're going to overlap it. Otherwise, you're going to have to treat the photo a little bit so that it works more with the text. On to the next example. One reason why I wanted to show this is you can see underlines. And we talked a lot about how they signal that it's something clickable. So you can see in here in this prototype, the person actually goes over it. There is a little effect that happens, so the underline disappears when you're hovering over that part of the text, and the photo changes. From what I'm seeing, it seems like it only changes if you hover over it, which is an interesting effect. You can see how this text is all caps. I don't think it has some kind of a character spacing, because I think this might be a typeface that was done just for the all caps treatment. Not sure. But it does look like it. You can see the line height is really small. You can see that all caps is even used in the different typeface in this interface that's used for all of the clickable elements in here. So consulting session, home, services, about us, our services, is it for me? All those things are actually interactive. So in a sense, everything that's interactive on this page uses all caps. But you can see in this, since it's not a typeface that was built for all caps use, there is noticeable character spacing in all of these. Why I wanted to show this is it has two interesting things I've noticed. One of them is using a serif font in all caps, which is not something that you see really often, but it is something that's going to work really well with this type of brand. You can see that all of the photos are a little bit on the darker side, so it's really easy to overlap them with text. And also you can see that the text in this part is broken up with little images. Another interesting thing is the amount of lines this title is broken into. As we're talking about the topic of all caps, I want to show you how you can often see all caps in areas like these where it's more like an eyebrow title above something. The typeface seems to be the same in this entire interface, which is interesting. And on the buttons and these eyebrow titles, it's in all caps. It does have a little bit of character spacing that you can notice between the characters. Not too much, but enough to make it legible. I picked this example to discuss visual hierarchy with you. You can see that this, and this is the same style of text. So 1 to 3 levels of headings / subheadings, and then everything that's not a heading or a title has the different font. Eyebrows in here are not using all caps, but they do use color in some areas, not in this one. And the paragraphs or like short descriptive text below some of these titles are using a different, more legible font with a lot less character. So you can definitely see that even though styling is very similar in all of these, it's very easily noticeable that this is like the main level, this is level 2, and this is the level 3 because of how big something is. This was done by the same designer. I'm also guessing it's the same project based on the styling and everything. I just wanted to show you how those same styles are used in different areas. In here, where there's a lot of these elements that are reappearing, there are less considered headings and more just blog post titles, I'm guessing. In here, the more legible one is used. Also, you can see how the text in here, again, highly legible, seems like a version of this text but without that much contrast, which again is interesting to notice because in all of the other areas the text that's used for legible stuff is the sans serif one. I found this example interesting, again connected to visual hierarchy. This pops out a lot more even though this part is colorful, and you can see that in here a particular style of text is used. It's even bolder than what they are using in here, but if you're kind of squinting and trying to figure out what's the main part of the screen to look at, it's actually this, because dominant part of this are illustrations, so the text is kind of secondary, while in here the title is the primary thing that you're going to notice. It's just an interesting part of seeing the form, and you can also see how the text changes and it kind of floats above, becomes this kind of floating label once someone enters something inside. And here, again, as we're talking about hierarchy, I want to show you how visually separated these two sections are. In this one, this is probably the most important part, and this is the important part, while if you're actually looking at this bottom section, the thing that you're going to notice is the plan that they're suggesting. Besides just using typography, they're of course also using color to signal those things, but you can see that the stylings in here are the same. The only thing that's different is the color. And it's also interesting to note that the label or the name of the plan is kind of secondary in here. The main thing is the price and kind of the call to action that you have below. Those are the things that are going to stand out. Also, this title is one of the most important things you're going to see in here. Dribbble is filled with examples of interfaces that are like really simple and really focused on some kind of motion or illustration, something very visual that's going to stand out. I wanted to show you this example because it feels like a real app. There is a lot of details in here. You can see different treatment of text in different areas of the screen, and we can kind of analyze it as an example of a real life product that ended up on Dribbble. If we do some kind of a screen test, you're going to notice this button, maybe you're going to notice this area, and like this photo in here is very dominant part of the screen, but everything else is really subtle. Nothing is really fighting for my attention. The first time when I'm using, I'm going to have to kind of analyze the screen a little bit to figure out where something is, but there are big visual breaks to signal those things to me. So, oh, this is most likely going to be connected to who this person is. These are all of the things that I can do, and related to that, I can switch, I'm guessing, through these tabs, and on the right side I have some other probably secondary details that can influence what I'm doing inside. When it comes to the levels of hierarchy, we have this as one of the most important parts. We have this, which is probably similar to this. So like all of the titles seem to be in a similar size. I'm unsure if they're the same. It might be a little bit hard to notice, but it does look very similar. This might be a little bigger than this, but this one is bolder, so they're kind of on a similar level of hierarchy. Unsure why the same style isn't just used here, but again, that's one of those things where you might do something differently, but overall, if you're looking at this, it's not like it's bad in any sense. This is an interesting example, and I wanted to showcase how you might approach something like a dashboard very differently to how you might approach something that's a very editorial-like website. You can see that it's really important to be colorful, branded. Text is kind of secondary in here, but it is an important part of design. You can see how interesting this typeface is because of the way that the O is tilted. Some of the other characters in here also have some interesting elements. You can also see examples of circular font being used. It's more of a decorative element than anything else. parts where there is more text than just like a couple of lines, they're using a different, more legible typeface, which is something that we talked about a lot. As an evolution of the previous one, we have an example of another branded website. We can take a look at a visual hierarchy, the main level of hierarchy, secondary one. I'm not sure if these two are actually the same, but this is just like a smaller version of the screen. I'm guessing that's the case. It seems like there is one level for the main display title that you're gonna have when you land on the page, and like all of the other ones that are a little bit secondary, but there is a third level in here with a couple of these. I'm guessing they're links. Besides that, you can see other visual elements being used alongside typography. So basically this is kind of, besides just communicating a message, it's also introduced as the main visual on the page. A similar thing is repeated across the page with these gradient elements that are happening either in the background or in here. And you can see that the parts of the text where there is a lot of lines of text, paragraphs that need to be read, a different, more legible typeface is used. This is an interesting one because, again, typography is a really big part of this. You can see all caps being used, and there is enough character spacing there to make all of this legible, and it's also used as an eyebrow subheading above the main headings. One thing that I wanted to stress in here is this part where I feel like the line height can be a lot smaller than it is, but one of the reasons why I'm guessing it's not is if you make it smaller, this part where the F and G are is probably going to overlap at some point. So you still want to have enough spacing there. And that's something that you need to think about when you're using line height on your titles and you're not using something like all caps, because you don't want the characters that have descenders to overlap with the senders of the next line. I really love this example because it showcased typography in a more interactive way. You can see how it's basically a part of like everything's transforming as you're scrolling down. Things are kind of skewed a little bit. When someone is going over these image examples, the text goes over the photo and it kind of inverts itself to still be legible. We talked about like very bold, in-your-face brands, and this one definitely feels like it's ready to disrupt. The typography is really bold, line spacing really small. There's no additional character spacing, but I don't think it's even needed in here, especially on these sizes. And you can see that when there is text, it still needs to be legible, so a different typeface is used. Again, just like a different type of a feeling that you might sometimes work on as a UI designer, but not a common way to style text, because it's not going to work for all kinds of brands. This is an interesting example because it really looks like a website that's already kind of ready to be implemented. Title in here, maybe lower the line height a little bit. I don't know, not too much. It doesn't seem like it's not working, but overall the space in here feels almost similar to the space in here. So that's one of the reasons why I might make it a little bit smaller. Why I found this interesting is it feels like it's using basically the same typeface all over, but the style of the typeface is different. So it's either using some kind of a bold or very light regular typeface weight. An interesting thing in here again is the use of the circular text alongside a play button. So this is an area where whatever it says in here, watch video, is not the most important message. It's more like using text as a decorative element next to the play button to kind of push that message further. It's really fun to see numbers as the more important things and like labels being secondary and even below the numbers. You can see how it works differently on different backgrounds and how because of that the color of the typeface is also different. Overall, it's just like a really nice example of using different styles, not a lot of them, to signal visual hierarchy and different sections of this project. This is another example where I found something interesting, and it's combining two different typefaces to create a style for the headings. So in here, there's always like a word or something else that's really bold and sans serif and legible, combined with a styled text used for other parts of the same heading. It's not something that you're going to see done a lot, but when it's done, and when it's done well, like it is in here, it's really interesting to see. Besides good visual hierarchy, I wanted to showcase this as an example of someone who really cares about typography. You can see hanging quotes in here, and you can really imagine, on especially sizes this big, how weird it would be if the quote was inside of this text and everything was pushed a little bit to the right, it would just lose this really fine line and guide that our eye has, where it's following the line we have in here with the text, and it just continues down to the element in here that's the card. This is a really great example of two typefaces being used together, one of them that signals like something more luxurious, and the other one that's really just supposed to be a legible typeface, very modern typeface. And see how there's a combination of the two being used across the design, where the headings and subheadings are most often this typeface versus everything else is this other typeface styled in a pretty regular way, or the all caps character spaced styling that we've seen a lot with these eyebrow headings. Going back to web applications and mobile applications, you can definitely see in here how we have the same style used for the main headings. There are some subheadings that appear in here. There's the same all over the place. You can see one paragraph style that's used in most of this text and some kind of a secondary style that's used in here. It's a little bit smaller than this, not too much, but basically one of the reasons why I think it was introduced is for these areas where if you use this styling, it's not going to be enough space. And also there is one style for the buttons and one style for the really small labels, the floating labels that are inside input fields and drop downs in these examples. What I really loved about this example is the way that the typography was basically used as a mask, and it communicates this, which is the name of the brand, but the main part is actually the photo that's behind it, and it's something that you're going to notice first, and then if you analyze it a little bit, you can actually see that this is kind of the message that they're going for. And it's a really fun way to do it, really interesting way, and I think it's done really well in here, where the text was used as a mask. We're not talking about a mask here, but it's again using text as something really visual and graphical in the interface. Especially it's common in these main areas of websites on the first fold where the text appears, and it's going to be your main visual driver to signal to the user, do they want to go further onto this page and learn more. And it's kind of using the powerful text with the background and with this shadow kind of skewed, tilted a little bit, so that it signals pushing down onto something. It looks like a 3D button that I can push down. So again, really interesting way to use typography as a visual element. This is again an example of a website that's done, and it looks like something that's a real website. So it's not just a Dribbble shot and that's it. You can really see how the photo in here was used, and there's this nice little break that the photo has, the subtle change in the background colors versus all of the white that's happening across the page. And it works really well because it puts more focus on the text that's kind of breaking into the photo, and also this button that's kind of in the middle right here for signing up. So it's really interesting. Again, visual hierarchy, a clear display title, different headings that happen across the page, and then smaller subheadings or titles of some of these sections below, which are just like part of this main section. I love this example because it really ties, the typeface really ties in the message that other visual elements are using. You can see how across the website there's this sense of rotation or irregular lines that are happening, and it's combined with a typeface that's also really sharp and has some of these interesting breaks in here, especially with Y. You can see how there is this little element in here that really stands out and makes the typeface really interesting. Same thing with L, really sharp edge, not something that you're gonna see in a lot of different websites, but it really works with this brand because of everything else that's also happening on the website. Now, I'm unsure if the typeface was the driver for it, so it kind of inspired what's happening in other areas, or if the other areas of the website and kind of the visual direction they wanted to take it in inspired what typeface to pick. A great example of visual hierarchy. You can see the main title, some of the secondary ones, how consistently it's used across all of these examples, and you can also see how grids are really used nicely in here. Basically, there is a very big signal the website is giving to me to follow this line, and in here the text appears, so it kind of feels really natural to the way it's flowing down from upper part of the website to the lower parts of the website. It's basically really interesting, and I'm always following some of these lines, even though they're not really connected. So like when you're scrolling to this, you're gonna go to this section and then to this one and then to this one. So you're not really ever gonna see this and this in the same area, but the fact that both of those are sitting really on the same lines, and those lines are really strict and they're happening across the entire page, your eyes can really get used to unconsciously following those things. So it's really important when you're setting your layouts to think about where your text is going to sit as well. Now, we went over a lot of website examples, going back to some of the dashboards now and web applications. You can see in here an example of a table, how labels are smaller than the actual text in those tables, how numbers are the most important elements in here, the labels are not, how tags are working in here. It does bring a pop of color, but it's not overused, and the text is still legible because of the contrast it has versus the background it's on. And you can also see how everything is really neatly aligned to the left. Basically nothing in here is not aligned to the left because there's no numerical data that you really want to compare in some of these tables. And that's also a common thing, more common than you'd think. Again, text is also used as a visual element. Combined with the color that's used in here, you can really see that it's kind of signaling, oh, there was some kind of a growth happening in the period that was happening before this day that we're looking at right now. This is an example of something that's not really a table, but it kind of follows the similar structure of rows of items happening one below the other. And you can see that the typeface in here and here, all of these are basically the same font size. I think updated 4 days ago. No, it still seems like it's the same, but it's just a little bit lighter than all of the other ones. And you can see different treatment of color. So in here, and in here, the color, there's 3 levels of color. This is the most important one, secondary, tertiary, and also this one feels a little bit bolder, so these two are a little bit bolder than this one. So basically just by differently styling the text and not using different font sizes, you're still able to signal visual hierarchy and what's more important than something else. Overall, in this entire example, you can really see like levels of basically section headers. The most important parts are the main navigational items. Some of them can be expanded and then have secondary navigation within them. And overall, if you move into one of them and there's still levels of data that everything is split into, there are tabs in here. This is an example of a table that has a lot of data aligned to the right, because a lot of it is comparable and you actually want to see. So besides just like looking at the text in here, I can really easily notice that like the smaller amounts are in here and I don't have to even read anything. That's one of the reasons why we have this right alignment and monospaced or tabular typefaces being used for data in here, because it's really easy to compare them. And the text width is signaling how big something is without even reading it. Also in here you can see text being combined with color and also an icon, because not all the people can see color or not see it in the same way that other people do. So you can definitely see that there is another element in here introduced in all of these, which is an icon going upwards or downwards to signal if there was growth or fall of the value of this cryptocurrency in a particular time frame. I found this example really interesting because it showcased how, even though I feel like all 3 of these items are links and clickable, not all of them always have to be underlined and styled in that way. There are other things in here that signal to me that this is clickable, be it this icon or visual next to it, or the fact that when I'm hovering over something, it now changes to an underlying link to further signal like, yes, this is clickable, please do click on this. Another example of labels being really secondary, smaller, and the main part of the screen is focused on the actual value. Even if I don't read this, based on the number and the value behind it, you can actually kind of figure out what this is. So even if there was no heart rate in here, just seeing 40 to 189 BPM, might be enough with the context of the app that you're looking at to know that this is actually the heart rate. Oh, and another important thing, you can really see how this text in here is basically smaller than anything else on the screen, like even smaller than these labels in here. And that's one of the examples that I talked about when it comes to working with data, that in data visualizations, you might have use cases where you're going to go lower from the recommended font sizes that are good enough for legibility, accessibility, just because it's kind of really not the most important part in here. You can see most of this from the visual itself, especially knowing that probably somewhere in here is going to be the 40s and in here it's probably going to be 190. So somewhere in the middle of those, you're going to have the average value in here. Now it says 57. I'm guessing that's because this is a Dribbble shot, so not all of the data needs to be accurate in here. Once again, taking a look at a different dashboard, you can see how navigation is treated in here, how these elements are treated in here, how here are two levels of hierarchy that we have, the most important title, secondary one, tertiary one in these cards that we have, and also the treatment of these bigger numbers, and also the treatment of these labels that are signaling either the growth or like the fall of, in here an example is unique conversations. The only reason why I showed this is for this example, it's connected more maybe to color than it is typography, but I still wanted to stress it as an important element. You see in here how all of these are basically on tinted colored backgrounds. So there is a little subtle blue in here, green, purple, and orange, and how the text in all of them is gray. Now, seeing gray text on a colored background is something that feels a little bit unnatural to us. On a smaller size like this, it might not even be as noticeable as it is on some of the larger areas where I usually see it. But I do want to stress that it's really important, if you're using text like this, maybe use opacity so that it kind of grabs a bit of the background color into it, or have different styles of color for text that you're going to be using on colored background. So in here, like a darker blue one, it doesn't have to be a lot of blue, but just like instead of gray, have a bit of a shaded gray that has a tint of blue or purple or green or orange in it. I really wanted to analyze this example because it feels like a website that's meant to be focused on reading. So one interesting part about it is there is one typeface in here. It might be the same or a different one in here. There's definitely this one which is not using all caps in here. There is this typeface for the titles. There is a third typeface for the text in here. So basically there's at least 3 different typefaces used in a design, which is again not something that you're really going to recommend to beginners, but this is done by a pro, so you can really see that it still works and there is a reason for it. This is part of the text that's supposed to like signal, hey, this is something that you need to read. These are titles that need to be very branded, and then these are titles of different articles that usually have longer titles. So this was one compromise that was done to ensure that more text fits into these lines, is to use a typeface that's really narrow. If I'm diving deep into it, I feel like most of this is basically working really, really well. I like the visual hierarchy. I like how everything is separated, where the lines are used versus where they're not used. But when I come to this part of the screen and I really need to read, I feel like this typeface is definitely a little less legible than I would expect because of the high contrast. So it's definitely a static typeface, and it's not something that I would really see a lot in areas where legibility is crucial. I really like this example because of one thing, and that's how these dashes are used. You can really see that they're not really signaling anything besides, oh, this is the end of the line, but it's a decorative element where typography again was used as a visual element in the design. It was done well, and it's a repeating element that kind of signals, oh, this is all a part of the same design. It's all following a similar structure. I wanted to show you this example just because of one thing, and that's how the call out in here is done. You can see that it's something where a person is supposed to be reading through this article a lot, so definitely there's a lot of paragraphs, there's a really good paragraph spacing between these lines, and then here you can see a call out with a line and some kind of a quote in here. No hanging quotes though, so one thing that I would definitely change. We're slowly getting to the end of this video. You can see in here how you don't have to use underlines in a typeface to underline something, and as soon as you don't, it feels less like a link and more as just like a decorative underline that you're using. And also you can use other illustrations or elements of illustrations or just something visual to kind of signal parts of the text without recoloring the text, styling it any kind of differently. So this is more like secondary elements around the text that make parts of the text stand out a lot more. This is also a great example of parts of text being different than everything else, and it's used more as a visual element than it is for legibility or anything else. So you can see O and 1E in here being really different to kind of give it more of a modern vibe that's really going to work and attract front-end developers to this conference. Now, as we're slowly talking more and more about using typography as a visual element, it's definitely something where you can play around with it and maybe kind of overlap it with an image in an interesting way for it to work. Again, not something that you're necessarily going to use on a lot of projects, but when the opportunity appears, you want to have this in your kind of tool set of like, ooh, I know what I could do in here to really make this specific product that I'm working on stand out because of how I'm going to use typography. Similar thing in here with the example that we just looked at. It's not overlapping the image, but there's like an element that goes over the image and then it's combined with the text to really give it a specific look and feel. And in here, on the other hand, you can see text as being used as a visual graphical element. So basically there's this A, and I'm not sure what this is. It might be like a Q or something, or just an O with a little decorative shape below it, or a G. Honestly, don't know. But it's just used as a decorative element. It's not something that's supposed to be read, but it's typography that's combined with texture and a gradient to just be a visual element in here. One of the last examples that we're gonna take a look at is this, where it's just an interesting way to see text being used in an example like this. Finally, I want to end on this note, and this is combining two typefaces again for just the title. And you can see how they're kind of clashing. Like, this is really modern, bold, loud typeface, while in here we have an elegant, simpler, not as loud or bold typeface. But when they're combined together, the messages that I get from both, this is going to be more like modern / elegant, because this typeface kind of removes the loud element of this bold typeface. And when they're working together, you can really get a sense of like what this brand was trying to achieve. So yeah, it's combining two typefaces that are kind of clashing, but doing it in a way that it's going to remove one part. If it just was this typeface of like new collection of Wish being this bold typeface, it would just be like loud, assertive. But because it's combined with this other typeface, it's removing that element. It's just keeping the modern vibe of this one combined with the modern / elegant vibe of this typeface. And together now they're just representing that because they're together. And that's it. I'm hoping this lesson was eye-opening and it showcased how you can really take bits and parts of a design and really analyze them and be vocal about the things that you're seeing and what they're communicating to you. And now you're going to feel more confident when you're presenting your designs and the ideas behind them. And when you're making some of these decisions, that you're not doing them subconsciously, but you're actually doing them purposefully and deliberately.